I've had a lot of people ask me why I'm going to the trouble of either being interviewed or having conversations with different types of people about different forms of sales. Well, each one of these conversations bring to you a different concept, a different ideology, a different way of approaching the sales industry. And I'm so proud to be able to share this with you, because with me, it goes back more than 25 years since I worked this concept. But you know something? To the best of my understanding, I'm the only person here in Australia that has sold investment property with 100% conversion rate on everybody I made contact with. And I'm very proud of that result, but I'm also very humbled by the company that gave me that opportunity. The company was Homecorp. The managing director at that stage was a man called Max Leishman, and Max had a brilliant idea that very few have been able to get hold of. And throughout this particular conversation, you'll learn a lot of things about investment, about home sales. It's part of the real estate industry. Now, I just want to talk to real estate people for a minute, because how many people in real estate can boast of the fact that they have 100% conversion on everybody they made contact with to make a sale of a home? Well, I'm one of the few, possibly the only one that I'm aware of here in Australia that has managed to do that. And the person that was right there by my side was a man called Bill Klohn. Now, Bill was a man that sourced the properties, and with what we have to share, please take specific notice, because you as an individual can learn a lot from this. You as a salesperson can learn a lot from this. You as somebody that's in real estate can also learn a lot from this, because what we're sharing here is a unique concept. I've never known anybody else to put a concept like this together, and I'd prefer to be able to share it with people rather than have it go into oblivion, and the whole sales industry is not privy to what I can share. It's unique. It's something that you should sit there with pen and paper, and it's also something that you as a salesperson should watch over and over and over, gleaming as much information as you possibly can, because I know for a fact it'll not only improve your ability to sell, but it'll take you to a level that you never thought possible. So enjoy what I'm about to present. But remember, it's not just me that's doing the presentation. There are two of us here, and the substance of what we present is not only unique, but it's also something that if you don't take information from it and learn from it, well, I've done the best I can. You now need to take it on board and do the best you can. Hello, I'm back again, and I've got somebody really special that I want to introduce you to, and his name is Bill Klohn. Now, Bill and I go back, we just worked it out, 27 years, where we worked together with a company on different projects in the actual home market. And Bill is still in the home market, and as you know, I've moved on to all sorts of good things, and I'm still here nearly 60 years after I started selling. And that's a record very few people actually want to have, but I've got it and I'm proud of it. Bill, welcome aboard. They don't know too much about you, so how about you introduce yourself so we know a little bit more?
Thanks, Peter. And yes, we do go back a long time. And I've started off in the engineering industry, got involved in the building industry. And when we first come together, I was working for a company as the acquisitions manager, identifying products that could be sold for investment. And your job was to sell the products. And so I had to identify it, package it, hand it over to you, and then your job was to identify clients and match them up with the property.
Let me just
That
fill
was
in
27 years ago, and we're still talking again today.
and still friends, which is more important.
Yes.
You know, the interesting thing is what Bill's talking about is something very few people had a very good handle on, because I was involved in selling investment property. The person that sourced those properties was Bill. He went to the trouble of not only sourcing the properties, but getting the valuations done on them. And the company that we worked for at the time was something unique too, because a guy called Max Leishman put together a process and he called it Homecorp. Now, Homecorp no longer exists, but what he put together, I think everybody in sales should get hold of because it's brilliant. And what we did, in order to get the actual sale made, there was 3 visits that the salesperson made with the actual prospect. On the first occasion, you'd go into their home and just basically explain how the company worked. And there was something brilliant with that too, because you came in with a folder full of resumes. And those resumes were the people involved in the company that these buyers may or may not get to meet. And in a lot of cases, they did, because we would arrange some of those people to meet with them. On the second call, we went to the office, a really flash office, and a lot of the work was done in the boardroom. And until you've seen a boardroom table that holds about 30 people, you haven't seen a boardroom table. It was massive, but the people would sit in this massive room, these wonderful, beautiful chairs, and you'd start discussing things with them. But that gave you the opportunity of actually either bringing people in that were still working, and a lot of these visits was 7 or 8 o'clock at night, so some of the staff was still there. And the ones that weren't there, you had the ability to call should you need to. So once you got past that second appointment, you then set up a third appointment, which we call a run. And the run was where a man took these people out on the road and showed them the property, but along the way showed them the shopping centres, the schools, and everything else that was relevant to what they were buying. The majority were investment buyers, some were owners, but overall, the message that you got in the selling process was absolutely brilliant. And by the third call, they knew exactly what the finance would be, how much they'd have to pay, and they would sign contracts with the solicitor, and they would treat it to a really wonderful lunch or dinner. That was basically how it worked.
What it was, Peter, was a sales process. And you've explained it quite eloquently. And Max was the one that put it together. And it was one step after another, which started with starting the sale to closing the sale. And they are all predetermined steps that the staff, like all the people involved, had to follow. And it worked very, very well.
You know, it worked brilliantly because I had a lot of people talking to me as to why I was actually selling as well as I was. I didn't go out and bring anybody into a premises or the location that they were thinking about buying unless I knew that they would buy. And the reason why I knew they would buy is because I followed the process. And you know, today, in so many things in sales, people want to bend the rules. They want to change the process because they know better. You know, I was a seasoned salesman when I came to Homecorp, but I still believe I'm the only one that ever came into Homecorp with 100% of what they call runs or 100% sales on anybody that I brought to a premises that they wanted to invest or buy in.
And it's because you followed that process, Peter, and you're exactly right. There are salespeople that you teach them how to sell or a process, but they apply their own personality to it, thinking that they can do it better.
Mm.
Unfortunately, that takes them off the track. You know, there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of error involved in creating this process. And if salespeople follow it, you get a result.
Look, it worked brilliantly. And at every stage, even the people that you met, they were all tuned in to make sure that the salespeople followed the process. But guess what? Salespeople being salespeople want to do what they want to do.
Yep.
And the interesting thing was, I already mentioned that I had 100% strike rate. And that I don't believe the company ever had before. But with that strike rate, the first 7 calls that I made were company leads. And they were hard work, but we got them over the line. But you know what happened after that? Every one after was a referral.
Mm.
That was a no-brainer.
That's a sales process in itself, obtaining the referral from an existing client.
Well, it wasn't hard because these people, if they were sold properly, they were so enthusiastic, they wanted their friends involved.
Yes.
If you half-heartedly sold them or they were pushed over the line, they didn't want to know about you.
If the client's satisfied and sold correctly, as you say, they're only too happy to share their experiences with other people.
Well, you know the best part? I looked at the commission, and the commission for a referral was 2.5 times more than the commission for one of the company leads.
That's because it didn't cost the company anything to generate it. You generated it.
Very
so
true.
The net result to the company was still the same value.
But Bill, it was so easy to create a referral.
Yep.
If you had a happy client.
Yes.
Now you're doing the same thing because you haven't left the industry. You're still doing parts of the industry. And these days, you've been in kid homes now for how long?
20 odd years, but 16 in my own company now. But yes, I sell building materials, but I package it and I have a systemised process where I've identified a market, which is owner builders, and I call it a kit home, but it's a package of building materials. And I'm still able to create homes for people. And it's just a niche market that I've fallen into. Enjoy it immensely.
Look, I've personally gone out and seen some of these. Bill's invited me to different parts of the country around Sydney to look at some of the projects that he's worked on over the years. And I tell you what, if that's a kid home, it's a built home, but it's done in such a way that because people are involved, it's a little less pricey. Homes are not cheap these days, no matter what you do. But if you can reduce some of the price, it obviously makes it a little bit easier for everybody.
I currently have my second architect in the process of purchasing from us.
Wow.
Yes. The biggest home we've done is 900 square metres, which was in the old scale, 100 squares. And that was an architect's own home.
Wow.
And got a fantastic result at the end of the day.
Well, you know, the most impressive homes that I've seen that you've built, which I never expected to be built, were concrete homes. And the insulation quality of those is something out of this world. Can you explain a bit on that too?
Yeah, I've searched the world for different building systems, and I've come across a product that was actually instigated in Malaysia. And it was developed because of the typhoons that they have over there. And it was very strong. And it was a core-filled product with concrete, but they used aerated concrete, which made it lighter, cheaper, but still had a certain amount of strength. And we've built these homes in New South Wales and even New Caledonia because of the cyclones that they have in the tropics. But yeah, very good building product.
I remember you telling me you went to Vanuatu quite often. and a few of the other islands in
Yes.
the area. And the only thing I really remember about that is I was on a cruise taking a break from when I was working with the Yellow Pages and ended up at Port Vila. Well, it takes about 3 or 4 minutes for the taxi driver to take you around town. It's not a big place.
It does.
So he suggested that he was going to take us up to the village. Now, we had to go up this massive mountain, and there were no such thing as railing fences on it. It was just basic dirt, gravel, and you got to the top of the mountain, and when you look down, you wonder, wow, how do we get up here? Because a few times the car would slip. But the reward was, when we got to the top of the mountain, went to the village, all of a sudden, they bring the kava out.
Yes.
And for those of you that don't know kava, it's the local drink that you drink. It looks like mud, tastes like mud, but within 15, 20 minutes, you're legless.
and your lips go numb.
Everything goes numb.
Yeah.
But on that occasion, I was very fortunate. I had a couple of larrikins with me, and we got introduced to white kava. I'd never seen it before.
Mm.
And that's the refined kava, which is basically the most expensive you can buy.
Wow.
And we drove down that mountain. The taxi driver, all of a sudden with a kava in him, decided he was going to become Jack Brabham. And here we are sliding down this basic dirt track. And the fall on the sides was 300 or 400 meters.
Wow.
So if he'd lost what was happening, I wouldn't be talking to you today. But we got down sort of half safely. And he said, do you want to book me again? Nobody did.
You mentioned Yellow Pages. Was this one of your rewards for sales with them?
I was very fortunate with the Yellow Pages because of the amount that I would write, they kept on giving me trips every year. And that was to a exotic location. Then you'd win a Christmas trip for you and the family. And in between, sometimes you were surplus to needs. So they gave you a ticket and said, go for a holiday for a week or two.
Yeah.
And you end up in a beautiful resort. It was wonderful. Look, it's true corporate.
Mm.
But, one of the things you and I talked about when it comes to things like the Yellow Pages, one of the areas that most people don't quite get is what happens in the selling process, because a lot of them go out there and they start selling, but a lot of it's opinion based.
Mm.
And I remember when I first started, I didn't get a chance to sell. I actually, because I was a baby face in those days, I was told that if I wanted to get into sales, I better go door knocking. And I did for a company called Hunter Douglas. Now, Hunter Douglas sells the aluminium siding, or had sold for many years.
Building product.
Building product on the side of homes. And what happened, I'm now one of their best.
Mm.
Because I'm one of these guys that just, this is what you got to do, let's do it.
Mm.
I didn't hang around waiting for things, I just made them happen. Anyway, I'm working in Melbourne, it starts to rain, like it does in Melbourne all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So they take us indoors because it was raining pretty heavily, and they put us on the telephone. Well, I get on the telephone, and within 5 minutes, I've got this lady about 3 times the size of a normal woman come up to me and say, you say that again, I'm going to sack you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for anybody watching this overseas, sack means fired.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought, I don't know what I've done wrong. 10 minutes later, she walks up to me and says, you are sacked. I go, what? You're fired. What have I done wrong? You said the unthinkable. What did I say? The salesman will be in your area on Saturday, and then you wanted to make an appointment.
Mm.
If you say that I'm going to be in your area, nobody will keep an appointment. And the funny thing is that was 60 years ago. And today I still hear the same phrase. And I make it a point not to keep those appointments because I know what they're doing wrong. It teaches them a lesson. If they're prepared to learn, it might teach them a lesson. And today, people are still making the same mistakes that they used to. And one of those is...
I've made that mistake myself, Peter, and I corrected it very quickly.
Well, it costs you money.
Yes, yeah. There's no commitment from the client.
Correct.
To your service, your offer, and because it's casual. Yeah, you are 100% right.
Well, the other thing
of experience,
mate, it was my experience as well, but I learned very quickly not to go down that track. Yeah. And in fact, I'll tell you something. When I got into sales, or I finally got an interview, this guy says, "How old are you?" And at that stage, I would have been probably 15, just turned 15. And what makes you think you can sell? Well, that's a challenging phrase. And I said, because I'm good. So he gives me this wad of paper, 16 pages and about 11-point type, single space. And he says, "Young man, you memorize that and you come back and prove that you can memorize it, I'll give you a job." So guess what? Nearly a week later, I've got the whole thing memorized. It was a challenge, but then again, I'm young and I'm really keen to work. And I get halfway through the first page and he said, "Stop." I said, "No, I've got the rest I can recite." He says, "Don't you get it?" I said, "What are you talking about? You're too young. You're never going to make a sale." No, I'm going to sell. Piss off. Don't you understand what I'm saying? That was my introduction to get into sales. And I've seen people make so many mistakes since, the most common one, and you can relate to this, all these guys stand around a water cooler or coffee machine or whatever. And what are they discussing? The sale they lost. Hello? As a manager, I used to hear that quite often. And I'd say, "Did you get the order?" "Yeah, they signed the order." "Did you get any money?" "Yeah, I got a deposit." "And when's the rest of the money coming?" And they'd blurt something out which sounded reasonable. "Well, let's talk after the money arrives."
I've seen people pay a deposit to get rid of the salesman, knowing that it was refundable, that they could get it back afterwards.
Well, that's still happening today, and it happens more often than people believe.
Yeah. And it's not a sale until the job is completed, until you've delivered your product.
Correct.
And the client is happy with it.
Yep. Well, in your case, you're talking lots of money.
Yes.
And it's easy to put a small deposit down on lots of money. Yeah. And then all of a sudden not be able to get the rest for whatever reason. And most of those people that put deposits down know they're not going to get it.
Yeah, with the fair trading laws and that today, there's only one way to be with your client, and that's upfront and honest. And because if you get caught out telling them something that's not correct, they go straight to fair trading and get their money back.
Yeah.
So why create a situation that you don't need to be in by telling people something that's not correct, which also comes back to knowing your product.
Well, after Homecorp, I got into the investment portfolios because I really had a feel that was a market that was going somewhere. And you know what I started selling? Ostriches.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here in Australia, we have the biggest ostrich farms in the world. And in fact, some of the Victorian farms are still sending container loads of ostrich meat overseas, mainly going to Singapore and Hong Kong, because the Asians love ostrich meat. And the reason why you don't see it in the stores, nobody can afford ostrich meat.
Well, they're just like a big chicken, aren't they? There's a lot more meat on them.
Not quite. First up, an ostrich is not an emu. I hate emu meat because emu meat tastes like soap.
Okay.
I can't be any more honest than that. And it's expensive. The only good thing comes out of an emu is they make prosciutto out of emu meat. And that's very tasty, very oily, because the emu is. The ostrich, on the other hand, is a bird with red meat.
Okay.
It's probably the best fillet steak you've ever tasted. And 30 years ago here in Australia, when they were selling ostrich meat, they were selling it at the IGA, and the 300 grams was something like about $40.
Wow.
And when you went to a restaurant, you would pay up to $100 just for a meal of ostrich meat. So it gives you an idea of how good it is. But secondly, we're talking about red meat. We're not talking about chicken, white meat.
Okay.
And that's what people think.
Yeah.
But, you know, with the ostrich, here in Australia, because of certain breeding protocols, we've had some university guys actually put together ostriches, would you believe, that are crossbred and crossbred and crossbred, and they call them an F1. They're almost the size of a plane. They grow to 10, 12 feet tall.
Wow.
Now, the small ostriches at the size of an emu could have up to 40 kilos of meat on them. These big buggers can get up to 300 kilos of meat.
Wow.
So imagine that if you're an ostrich investor and your farm is producing these monsters, and those monsters, I used to remember selling, you could sell either as pairs or as trios, and obviously one male, two females. But the male is so horny, he needs to mate every 15 minutes. So one female would get worn out very quickly, so two is ideal. And they would then produce produce eggs, and the eggs were taken away from them, because in the wild they might produce 60 or 70 eggs in a year. But what happens is they get eaten by everything else. So this farm used to put them into incubators, and they had about a 98% hatch rate. Massive. Doesn't happen in farming protocol. But here's the best part. The pair you'd sell for about 100,000. Now, we're talking 25 years ago. Can you imagine converting that to today's money? And the trio was close to 150,000. So you needed some finesse about you. You needed a pretty good process, just like Max's, to be able to get people to buy from you. And it was very rare that I ever used the second call. You'd set it up by phone. You'd go out and see the people. The decision makers would be there. You'd put your presentation on the table, and the people gave you a simple yes or a simple no. And you know who my biggest buyers were? The corporates and small business, because these people wanted an investment portfolio away from everything else that they were doing. They didn't care about it being high risk as long as they knew there was money coming. So I'm going through that on purpose, because what happened is, in a lot of my selling career, I did things which are unusual, but I tried to follow a system all the way through. And when the system worked, I made a lot of money. Now, you brought up Yellow Pages. I'll give you a little story that you've got to try and get your head around this. I've been in my own business. Now, what happened, here's a guy that's now 20 years old. At the age of 18, I buy a Mark II 2.8 Jag. It's 4 years old when I drive it into my father's driveway. He comes running out of the house saying, I don't know who you borrowed that from. Get it out of here. People are going to think I'm making too much money, right? Some of these people that are watching this have heard it before. Well, the funny thing was, a couple of weeks later, when he finally drove the car, he had a totally different idea of the car. He wanted it in the driveway. This is my son's. Look what he's managed to do. I was importing guitars at the age of 18 from overseas. That's what I was doing. I was absolutely enjoying guitars. I was pretty good at it. And those guitars, here's an 18-year-old kid that's bringing guitars in from overseas that most of the local musicians can't afford.
Mm.
But this is how much money I'm making out of sales. And it got to the point where at the age of 20, I'd made enough money and saved enough to buy a house in those days for cash. All right. 20-year-old kid. It doesn't happen. My dad used to say, what do you do again? I'm in sales, Dad. What's your problem? And typical father says to me, good, let's go and buy a house, maybe 2 houses with what you've got. We'll pay them off. You're making enough money and you can buy a new one every 6 months or 12 months. You'll be set by the time you're 30. What kid at the age of 20 listens to his father?
I had one like that too. And but my car was a Statesman, top of the line Statesman. And everybody thought it was my dad's car because it was parked in his driveway. And my dad told me, buy a block of land, build a house. But I knew better. I just bought a better car.
There you go. Well, what I did with my money at that point is I said, I'm going into business. I wanted to set up a music business, and my father was totally against it. He said, no, you buy a house, you set yourself up for life. Listen to me, you'll do well. Your way, I'm not sure where you'll go. Well, coming from your dad, they're fighting words. So what I did, I'm living in Melbourne, and I decided I'm moving up to Sydney because in those days, it was 1,000 kilometres from where we are, probably about a 13-hour trip by car, too expensive to fly there and back. Nobody could afford that. And even the phones were so expensive, you couldn't stay on the phone for more than 10 minutes. You've actually used up days and days of your wages. That's what it was. So I go up to Sydney thinking I'm safe. I use as much of that money as I need to set up in business. Within 12 months, I've now got a teaching studio, which is bigger than anything they've ever seen in Sydney. 350 students in that centre. And then on top of that, this is the best part, within a year after that, the Conservatorium of Music in Sydney turned it into an examination centre for classical guitar. I don't believe that's ever been done since by anybody. But that's how big the studio grew.
So what was your sales process in obtaining the clientele for your studio?
What I used is a lot of my own selling techniques. First up, they would come into a shop and I'd demonstrate a guitar and then they'd ask about lessons. And it was simple to take it from there because, again, I used, without knowing it, something similar to Max's system. I said, look, I've got 4 teachers here and this is their history. This is their background. They're all musicians. They play here and some of them were rock musicians, which were pretty well known in those days. So all of a sudden, everybody wanted to come to the studio because this guy had some contacts. But nobody realizes I didn't build those contacts up till I got to Sydney. My Melbourne contacts in Sydney were useless in those days. It was a totally different country.
But you developed a sales process within your business to grow the business.
Well, I not only developed the sales process, but I also had a referral process. I knew enough about referrals in those days to get people to bring their friends in, and I would entice them with free lessons.
Yeah.
So if your friend came and started learning in my studio or my teaching studio, I would give you 3 free lessons. But if you're paying for 5 free lessons, you're paying a lot of money. And the way I used to sell it, not by the lesson, I would sell a coupon with 5 coupons in a little book, and they would buy that book, and that would be the next 5 weeks. Can you just imagine sending some referrals in and you get 3 more coupons? Now, you equated back to today. A lot of people teach guitar at $40 an hour. So you buy a coupon of 5 books is $200, which is a fair price today. But you now bring a referral in and you do $120 worth of coupons. for free.
Mm.
It stands to reason a lot of the young fellas are going to get more free lessons and then get mother or father buy their $200 coupon book, and they've got some extra cash.
Yeah.
You know, so I played that game perfectly. And then upgrades, they would come back to the same
develop the
place.
sales process again. And
Yep.
if you follow the process, you get results.
Well, the hardest part was planning it.
Yep.
But I already had some experience in Melbourne where I was working for a teaching studio as well as playing. And there I thought, hey, I can convert this. And I think he's not doing as well as he should because he doesn't want to give anything away.
Mm.
And I believed in freebies get more business.
Mm.
And a lot of people are still using that today. You know, I know the Harvey Normans and whatever. Buy from me, I'll give you $100 coupon for the next product or whatever. And that still exists.
Yeah. Now, come back to door knocking. Door knocking doesn't happen today. Or does it?
You've hit a real sore spot with me because let's talk about door knocking, because a lot of people don't call it door knocking. They call it cold calling.
Yeah.
Cold calling, just a mere 2 words, that puts a shiver up my spine.
Mm.
Just imagine I have to cold call to write business. Hello. Every time I've held seminars over the past 50 years, the one thing I tell people, stop cold calling and start prospecting.
Yeah.
Now, when you start prospecting, you have a totally different mindset because people say, yeah, I can prospect. We now knock on doors. And people within half an hour, within an hour, find that all the rejections they're getting start to get to them. Now, people say there's such a thing that you need to look at when you go out door knocking, and it's willpower and inspiration. Well, first up, the willpower will get me knocking. But if I've been knocked back every 5 minutes in the last hour, what's with my willpower? That's now started to wane.
Yeah.
And the only thing that'll keep me going is inspiration. Because if I feel inspired, I'm going to do something. If I feel that I'm door knocking and I'm pushing my willpower, I won't last. Because my mind's going to be saying, you could be doing something better than this. You could be back at the office making phone calls. You could be doing something else to generate sales. But I would pursue that, and most people that I used to work with, the professionals, would pursue it because they could see their conversion at the end of the week. Now, most people in sales today, if you work for a corporate company, if you're converting 1 in 4, which is 25% of the people you see, you're considered good. But if you're converting 1 in 10, like a lot of salespeople do, you're going broke. But if you've got a wage at the end of the week, you can afford to go broke because at least you've got something to put food on the table with. Most of the salespeople I know, when they're canvassing, are converting at 1 in 2. So, you know, if you make 10 appointments at the beginning of the week, you'll have 5 sales. And depending on the size of the sales is to how lucrative that becomes. And for good sellers that have got a good product, they're not converting at 1 in 2. They're converting a lot better than that. My conversion rate for many years was at 92%. First call sale. I got into a hall of fame because I was converting at that level.
But it's a skill that you develop through experience. And I'll just share with you something that happened to me today. I've got a project in Victoria, and at the moment there's a big shortage of building products, and I was looking for a frame and truss manufacturer. Done what most people do. You go to the internet, you search it, come up with a name, send them off an email, And the guy from the company, who was the owner of the company, responded. And he said, "Oh, tell me about what you want, all this." As it turned out, they only do frames. They don't do the frames, they only do the trusses. And he said, "Look, I can't help you." Key question: do you know anybody that can help me? And he said, yes. He said, a company that I used to work for, they do this. I will pass on your details. No, he said, I will actually ring the guy and get him to call you. And he did.
Yeah.
And that was all through one question, one which relates back to sales. I was trying to sell my services in my company and asked him in a nice, polite way, could he refer me to somebody else? And he not only did, he took it to the next level.
You bring up something which I think is very fascinating, because when I started in sales, I finally got a mentor, because you couldn't find anybody that could teach you anything. But 60 years ago, it just didn't exist.
Yeah.
And this guy called Les Adams, my very first mentor, says, I'll teach you on the basis you don't talk to anybody else that either works here or outside of here. I don't want you to be led down the garden path with wrong information. So in typical fashion, I'm still a young fella, and people start talking to me because I'm selling up a storm. I'm selling more than they are. They're asking me questions to try and get my information.
Yeah.
And I would then reciprocate with some questions. And at one stage, Les watched this. As soon as I finished talking to this guy and he says, I don't want to know you anymore. I told you not to speak to anybody else. I don't want you to be ramrodded into anything. And what I'll teach you is what I know other people won't, because other people won't give you more than 80 or 90% of what they know. They keep that last 10 or 20% for themselves so they can look a lot better than everybody else. And guess what? It's still happening today.
Yeah.
People don't pass on the information that they should.
Mm.
Well, one of those times after that, I started getting good at what I was doing. So now I'm teaching others, because I'm supervising at the age of 18, believe it or not. I'm supervising a whole bunch of salesmen, twice my age, and I'm still outselling them because, again, the foundation was right. You know, the interesting thing is I've seen so many people break away from that foundation, and then all of a sudden they may have been selling up a storm. Their sales come to a grinding halt because they convince themselves they can't sell anymore. Now, when that happens, a lot of the people that call themselves salespeople then start to embellish. And what wasn't true all of a sudden is now coming out of their mouth. So they're starting to tell lies in order to get business. Now, guess what happens when you get caught? Not only is your business gone, but all of the referrals and everything else that come with it. And then they wonder why they need to leave the selling industry, because it no longer wants to support them. And that's something that's not only been happening all of the years that I've been in sales, but you notice it even more so today because of the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many people get caught out. Like, as an example, in the car industry, you go in the car salesman, you all about the car. But now when a client goes in, the client knows more about the car than what the salesman does because they can research it. They catch them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that exists. And the only way you're going to get past that is you've got to build a good enough rapport where the people, the prospects, start to trust you. Because once you start building that trust will grow. And a lot of people don't know how to build the trust, or don't care to build the trust. They think, I've got a good presentation that's going to give me everything I want. So I ask, what's your conversion rate? And you know what? Somebody that's got a bad conversion rate doesn't want to tell you. The people with a good conversion rate want to brag about it. Those that have got a poor conversion rate just really want to say, well, you know what I mean? You've heard it all before. And the interesting thing is, when you start going down that track, you start opening yourself up to all sorts of garbage. People that have opinions. I've put out banners based on opinions, and I say in my banners, opinions are like a fart. They never should be shared with anybody.
Yep.
And that's the truth, because the minute you've got an opinion, you start to share it. God knows where that opinion came from, what inspired that opinion in the first place, because it's not what people want to hear. And all of a sudden, you're going to start losing your friends if you start providing opinion after opinion. I would prefer people put the runs on the board, show what they can do, but don't talk to me about what you might be able to do.
Mm.
Let me bring you through my history, because after I'd actually been in business for myself for many years in the music scene, my marriage breaks up. I've gone back to Melbourne to try and save the marriage. I've still got part of the business in Sydney. Other people are running it for me. We're now in Melbourne. Marriage is gone. And I've got a friend that says, I think you need a change of life, mate. Just get away from the music for a little while. Do it for maybe 6 months, 12 months. And if you can find something else, do it. And at that stage, I've got a big reputation as a musician. People have known me over the years. I've got the conservatorium supporting the work that I do. Actually, even when I came back to Melbourne, one of my friends was conducting the Junior Melbourne Symphony.
Wow.
He says, why don't you turn up every so often and I'll give you a chance to do some conducting and do some orchestration work. And he was smart, because he'd want me to orchestrate something. So I'd give him the platform of what he wanted. He'd then go and sell it to somebody. Right. And then embellish on what I did. And I used to enjoy that. And I remember at one stage, I decided, I'll take him up on his suggestion of going out and getting a job. Well, the only place I could think of was to look in the paper. And there's this big ad in the paper from the Yellow Pages. They'd just gone from pink, and they're now promoting the Yellow Pages, because that was a good thing to do in those days. And you know what happened? I get an interview. And then I find out, after I get into the interviews, I'm talking to the sales manager, who at that stage asked me a question. Why should I give you a job? Well, that's simple, because I work pretty hard. I'm pretty smart at what I do. And as I keep on producing the results, it'll keep elevating you. And you'll want me to stay with you so that you can keep getting elevated as you go up the runs. He gave me the job. I found out afterwards there were 4 positions and there were 72 people applying for those 4 positions.
Wow.
So I get in, and you're going to love this, Bill, because what then happens is I go into training. 3 weeks of training, mate. They were talking garbage. They were talking such basic stuff that I didn't want to know. And I went back to the sales manager and I said, mate, I can't handle this. Why don't you let me go? We'll shake hands and I'll move on. He said, I think you got potential, mate. Why do you want to leave? I said, mate, I know what needs to be done. All you people really want to do is to send me out there to talk to somebody who's got a little ad, and you want me to upgrade it to a big ad. He said, that's right. You think you can do that? Come on. I've just done commission all my life. I don't know what this corporate stuff is. So they let me have a few appointments, and I go out and put the paperwork together. The next day, I've had enough. I don't want any more of this, because I left home at 7 in the morning. I had appointments all day, 9 appointments for the day. I get to my last appointment 2 hours late. We started at 7 p.m. Lucky the guy waited for me. I then get home sometime about 11 o'clock. And now I've got to do the paperwork. I don't even know what I'm talking about, what I'm doing. my first day out on the road. So about midnight, I think, I've got to get out of this place. It's too much for me. I can't handle this corporate stuff. Walk back in to the sales manager's office the next day. And he says, well, go and see the supervisor up there. He'll help you, because he was too busy. So went to the supervisor and I said, here's my briefcase. They gave me a briefcase. I turned the briefcase upside down and I said, I quit. Dropped all the contracts on his desk. He said, did you actually see any? I said, I think I did. Did you make any sales? I think I did. Next minute, he's going through this. I've now made 9 sales. They were expecting their top sales professionals to actually upgrade 2 contracts a day. I do 9 on my first day out. I've never had any training. So what then happens, he calls in another supervisor. That supervisor then calls the sales manager, says, I think you better get in here because there's something weird happening. Tony turns up. The guy's name is Tony Knight. He says, what do you think you're doing? I don't need you to insult me. I worked pretty hard to get what I'd got done yesterday, because he's working through the contracts, and he says, no, I want to compliment you. We've never seen anybody write these sorts of figures. Their budget was $250 increase on last year's contracts in one day. I came back with 9,500. Right. That's how I got introduced to the Yellow Pages. So obviously I went up and up and up and up. But there's a couple of real highlights that I haven't shared with anybody, and I'll do it with you. Yeah. I got elevated in the company, and my figures were that good after 18 months. I'm now a senior consultant doing major accounts. People like Ford, GMH, etc. I'm working on those. So that's where I've got to in the space of less than 18 months. And they think my figures are pretty good, so they're going to reward me. And they send me off to Papua New Guinea. Now, if you've never been to Papua New Guinea, that's an experience to start with. But secondly, I got introduced to other stuff apart from kava up there. And there was no tax on any of the alcohol that was sold. Still expensive according to to what the locals were earning, but according to what we were paying, it was very cheap. So we go out there and we've got a team of 12 people. 2 of us come from the Melbourne office, which are the top performers. And the other guy that was with me was one of my idols. When I got to the Yellow Pages, I said, this is the best guy in Australia. You better just watch out, see what he does, and see if you can copy some of it. Well, he made friends with me in the first couple of weeks based on my figures. So we go to New Guinea together, and we've got each other's backs. The budget in New Guinea was pretty steep. And you know what happened? After 5 weeks, my friend Richards writes 400% to budget. You're not going to guess what I wrote. I wrote 800% to budget. Between the 2 of us from Melbourne, we accounted for 50% of the revenue increase in Papua New Guinea that year. So we outwrote the other 10 people massive amounts. The following year, they think, well, these 2 guys pushed and pushed and pushed to get those sales. There's no way that they're going to be able to do anything with this. We're going to send them over all the calls that they made last year, and we're expecting them to decrease dramatically. They've oversold. Well, that next 12 months, my figures came in at 300% over the 800% I wrote the year before. Richard's figures came over 200% over the 400% that he wrote the year before. We accounted for 35% of the revenue. Meanwhile, they give me a state to look after, Tasmania, which was a basket case. And the first year I worked Tasmania, in between the 2 Papua New Guinea canvases, I have a revenue increase of 40% on last year's revenue. Never been done in the world before, Bill.
What do you attribute that to?
I'll tell you in a sec. Because you know what happened the next year? I set another goal for 40%. Guess what happened? My team achieved it with me.
Yeah.
And the third year, guess what I set? 40%. And again, the same goal.
Okay.
The revenue trebled in 3 years. Now, the reason why all of this was happening is I learned about a couple of things that I never knew about pretty much before that. One was the law of attraction. And the other one was goal setting at a level most people don't understand. So all of a sudden...
that was a key point that you just said. You set yourself a 40% goal.
Yes.
And you achieved it.
Well, I had no choice.
Yeah. Yes.
Because you know what they were saying in Australia, because nobody in the world had ever achieved anything more than about 15% revenue increase on a book anywhere. We're talking capital city now, 40% increase. And all around the world, here in Australia, we were beating the world. And that year, the first year, it was around about an 8% revenue increase Australia-wide. We're writing 40. The following year, get another 40. The year after that, I get another 40. But in between that, I pushed that hard. My managing director flew out from Melbourne to try and convince me not to go for that next 40%. But I went for it anyway. And he took me out to dinner. He took me out to breakfast. I saw him on the plane, and I just went ahead and did my own thing. About 3 months after that, I end up with a heart attack. I'm 31 years old, never had one before, didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So they put me into hospital. After 3 weeks or 2 weeks in the hospital, my staff are coming in like they did a couple of times a week to come and say hello. And I'm walking out of the hospital. and my PA says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going home." "You can't go home. You're blue, grey colour blue. You're sick." I went home. I didn't want to listen to anybody. And I'm running the office by phone. My managing director gets hold of this information. He rings me and he says, "What do you think you're doing?" So, "Where are you?" "I'm at home." I said, "Well, we don't pay you to be at home. We don't pay you to be in hospital. We pay you to be at work." And I said, "Tell me something, Tony. Are the figures still coming in like they should? Am I on target?" "Yeah." "What are you making the phone call for?" And he said, "You got a fair point." You know, that was probably one of the most interesting times in my life. I learned so much about what I was doing, and Richard Fleetwood, the guy that was mentoring me in the early stages of the Yellow Pages, and so was Tony Knight, they passed on so much good information that stayed with me for the rest of my life. And then I got, from there, went into my own business, and I started producing audio tapes and selling seminars. I couldn't work more than 2 days a week selling audio tapes and seminars because I was booking up the seminars 3 months ahead. People wanted the seminars.
So part of your success is attributed to other people teaching you what they knew.
You know, the biggest thing that I learned...
But you taking it on and working with it.
Well, I think there's another equation there. You take it on and personalize it. A lot of people don't understand how to personalize whatever's happening in selling. And I'll tell you what happened in my early stages of the Yellow Pages, because Richard Fleetwood was the first to teach me this. And he started teaching me how to close the sale. I'd never known about closing the sale before. I was a quick learner, and the more I learned, the more I was closing. I attribute everything I did in the Yellow Pages, those massive increases, by not only focusing on goals, but knowing how to close a sale. Now, today, you're going to have a lot of people tell you, no, that's old-fashioned. You don't want to get involved in all the techniques on closing the sale. Well, over the last I don't know, whatever it is. When I got really serious about closing the sale, I ended up putting out 7 volumes of the book, Closing the Sale.
7?
7.
You only gave me 1.
Well, I got a remedy.
and I've still got it, and I use it with my salespeople today.
Well, mate, I owe you a few books if that's the case. Now, I'll tell you what happened. We now have 50 ways of closing the sale in 7 volumes.
Okay. Well, I might have volume 1.
We're talking about 350 closing styles.
Yep.
Do you know how many closing styles I road tested to write those 7 books?
I would say quite a lot, because I've read that book that you gave me, I'd say at least 10 times. And each time I pick another closing technique out of it to apply to what I'm doing on a daily basis.
Well, I'll give you a technique that'll improve even what you're doing there. First up, I road tested over 1,500 closing techniques.
Mm.
I still have at my disposal 150 closing techniques should I want to write book 8, 9, and 10. That was my intention.
Mm.
But a lot of people say, you don't go down the track learning those closing styles because that's crazy, that's old-fashioned, and your customers are going to pick up on them. Well, you're a testament that'll say, no, that's not true.
You've got to find the ones that suit you, your market, and your client.
Yes.
And they're in that book.
And then when you personalize it, you then have 4 or 5 different alternatives to that one close.
Yes.
And here's the other thing that's important with understanding that. The minute you start learning closing techniques, you bring in something you won't get out of general selling, and that's discipline. It's the discipline that allows you to share that closing technique, but also to know that closing technique and when to use it. I still apply closing techniques that I was using 50 years ago, and they're just as powerful today. But we've got these sales trainers that say, no, that's old-fashioned stuff. It's not going to help you. Well, it helped me to the point where I was closing 92% on the first call, and I did that while I was training salespeople. Nobody else had ever done that before.
Yeah. People buy on emotion. There's a lot of emotion in there, and you've got to recognize it, you've got to work with it, and use it to your advantage.
Billy, so many people in sales want to use logic. And if you want to get your customer offside,
Yeah.
Start selling. Now, the 2 things I'm going to bring up, start selling logic. But secondly, a lot of people get involved, forget emotion just for a minute. They actually get involved in the wants and needs process. And so many people are teaching that you can only sell your customer based on needs.
Mm.
Well, if you want a low conversion rate, close 1 in 10, sell on needs. But the one thing that you'll do when you start selling on needs, you're going to get your customer angry, because the customer wants to buy what they want, not what you tell them they need. So the minute you start bringing up needs selling, you're not going to sell.
I understand that more than most, being in the housing game, because women know what they want.
Yes.
It's not what they need, it's what they want. And you've got to work with that to be able to give them what they want, satisfy their needs, and you've got the sale.
Look, I agree with you totally, but you're in an industry that I think amplifies that.
Yeah.
People will call you to come to their premises, not based on what they need. They say, this is what we want.
Mm.
So you plan around what they want. But we've got all these skinny brains that keep on insisting on teaching how to sell based on needs. Now, I stopped teaching based on needs 50 years ago. And yet today, all these smart Alecs know better. It's need selling. You can't sell on one selling, you're going to upset the client. No, it's the other way around. So I'm glad you brought that one up, because that, again, is another bone that I really need to pick with those people in the training industry. You know, the biggest problem in the training industry, a lot of people fell into training by accident. They came to work for a company, and the company all of a sudden said, we need a sales trainer. They're not going to take the best salesperson off the road and turn them into a trainer.
That's what a lot of companies do.
They take the maybe almost plausible person and they become the sales trainer.
Mm.
These people couldn't make it in selling, but now they're a sales trainer. How does that work?
Mm.
And the worst part is, I've spoken to so many people over my life as I've been training others that have been in the training field for 30, 40 years, but don't know anything about selling.
Mm.
Come on. It's still happening today. And a lot of companies wonder why their sales are going backwards.
Mm.
The internet is something else that contributes to the whole breakdown in the selling industry. You know, every Tom, Dick and Harry can have a say. But if you start looking at the internet section by section, post by post, I can guarantee you're going to find 70, 80, 90% of the stuff that's in there absolute garbage.
Mm.
And yet people are posting it because they've got an ego, and they don't even know what an ego close is. They just have an ego. And with those type of people, I work an ego close to perfection. And the interesting thing is, those people genuinely believe what they're doing is selling. Talk to them in 2 or 3 years' time and ask them if they're still in sales. Oh, I tried sales. It wasn't for me.
I've heard that before. Yeah.
There's so many people that confess it.
Yeah.
You know, the interesting thing is, selling is an art form. The better you can work your art, the better money you're going to make.
But it's also a satisfying thing to do. I had a client come into our showroom for the 3rd time the other day. Quite reserved sort of a guy, wants to build a house, and something came up in the conversation, and I said something I could relate to another client's situation, and I happened to mention this to him, and he said, "Oh, you're talking about Annette?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Yeah, she referred me to you."
Yeah.
And that's a very satisfying result, that I'm sitting down with a pre-qualified client that's a referral from somebody. They didn't volunteer that information up front. It come out afterwards. And yeah, very satisfying.
He got to trust you first.
Yeah.
That's how it worked with him.
Yeah.
You know, that just brought me back, that one question you asked previously, to when I first joined the Yellow Pages. Remember I told you about Richard Fleetwood?
Yes.
One of the first things that I heard come out of Richard's mouth, because he was so focused on closing the sale, and he said to me, what most people don't realize, if you can't close, you can't sell. And how true that is, because most people will come into selling, they don't want to learn closing techniques, but they want to go out and sell. Hello? It's like getting into a car with no brakes. It'll run down the road for you. How are you going to pull it up?
Yeah.
And the most important thing in the selling process is you build rapport by building trust.
Mm.
And the greater the trust, the greater the rapport, the greater the sales. And the better that you get at your craft, the more money you make. And that's the important factor.
Mm. You also got involved in the healthcare industry at some stage too, didn't you?
I did, because I bought some equipment only because my health waned. I had a massive stroke 20 years back, and I was looking for some relief. There was nothing that I could get that helped me very much. And then I came across a product called Niagara Therapy. And I bought a small hand unit and a small pad that I could put behind my back. And I found that the relief I was getting from that was absolutely astounding. So I got the guy back and I said, you talked about chairs last time, talk about chairs again. So I buy a chair. Now, 20 years ago, those chairs were anywhere from 12 to 15,000. That gives you an idea of the cost. What I invested between the hand unit, the pad, and the chair, I didn't invest in a bed. I probably might have to in the near future. But what happened is I spent the best part of 20,000. So they came to me saying, you're looking to get back into workforce, aren't you? You used to sell. And I said, yeah. And at that stage, I was getting a lot better because of the therapy. And they put up an offer on the table and I accepted it. I wasn't physically able to work 5 days a week, but I could put in maybe 3, maybe 2. Unless I went to the country, I'd stay there for a week and I'd put as many days as I could. And here again, when I was working, my conversion rate was very high. So I didn't need to do the amount of work most other people needed to do. And I spent 5 years in that company. And we parted company, believe it or not, because I was too old. I'm at 68 years old and the company couldn't get insurance. So I couldn't be out on the road because I couldn't get public liability insurance, or they couldn't get it and work with me on it. So I left the company, and in lots of ways, I'm glad I did, because if anything, what they were doing was holding me back a little bit in what I could do. So since I left them, as you know, I've now produced something like about 1,500 videos. I've got a whole heap of stuff that I've finished, a lot of books that I've finished writing. I don't want to talk about how many books I've got, but they're on the internet. And the important thing is people can go on the internet now and they can pick up a lot of other stuff that I've been working on for free. This I'm pleased about. I'm the biggest content creator in the selling industry ever. Little guy in Sydney, Australia. Nobody's produced as much as I have, and I keep on wanting to produce, because at my age, mate, I need to leave a legacy, and I'm getting on in years. I don't know how long the health is going to hold up, but while I've got the mind active, I want to keep it active.
Well, you've left a legacy with me, and we've been friends for a long time, but I've learnt a lot from you.
Thank you.
And that book, you still owe me the other 7.
The other 6 volumes, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Listen, I'm working on one book at the moment, which is something phenomenal. And it's just taking up a huge amount of time. I'm into the first 2 chapters of the 18 chapters of this book at this stage, and I've got around about 4 hours, a little bit over 4 hours up already. That is on video. So, but why it's taking a lot longer is I go through a certain point in the book and I think to myself, hang on, I can include something else and I can add to that. And while I'm adding, you're getting all this extra information that's not in the book on video. And the reason why I'm happy to pursue video is I've had a number of my friends turn around and say, we read your books and they make a lot of sense. We get a lot out of your books, but we have to read the book in its entirety. But we watch you on video, and the one thing that comes through on video is your passion. That's what we like about what you do and what you say. And that's something I didn't realize until I heard about 3 or 4 people tell me that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah,
it is. And, you know, there's a lot more that I can do.
And another word that you can add there too is conviction. Is you believe in what you're saying be 100% correct.
I'm going to write that down because I reckon that's brilliant. That's a very brilliant assessment. Look, I've purposely made sales my own career because of what it's given back to me. I wouldn't have had my lifestyle if it wasn't for the selling industry. You've known me long enough to know, I think the last 20 years I've driven nothing else but Lexus now. And it's the way it is. But before that, I was like you. I was driving these big, massive luxury cars, and I don't know any other lifestyle. I don't want to know any other lifestyle. As you move forward and as you grow, things start developing in your favor. But you know what? You need the focus to have them develop in your favor first. And a lot of people just willy-nilly think, oh, yep, I'll do what he does and I'll have as much money, I'll have as much behind me as he does. And guess what? They're still waiting because the focus isn't there with it.
There's one saying that I sort of really like, and that's, you learn by your experience. No, a wise man learns by experience. But a wiser man learns by other people's experience.
Correct. I love it.
And that is so true. And you've been down the field, out in the field, and you've had that experience and you're trying to pass it on to people. And I'm one that's benefited from it. So I appreciate you for that.
Thank you, Bill. Look, I think it would be very selfish of me to go to the grave without at least sharing what I know. I'm now looking forward, because of this media and social media all around the world, to sharing a lot more. I've got so many invitations now for me to go and talk privately and talk publicly in the States. And if I can, health-wise, I'll do it. Because I think there's a massive audience in the States. And one of the things that one of the areas I've been working with is in the car industry in the States. A lot of people I've now developed good friendship with tell me that the car industry right now is the worst they've ever seen it. People come into the car sales industry in America, and if they last 3 months, they've done well.
Yeah.
If they last 6 months, they get a retainer. So it's all commission. Apparently 95% of people that come into car sales in the States don't stay.
So you mean they don't give tips?
Sorry?
By car, you're supposed to give the salesman a tip?
Oh, everything else in America, I didn't know that one. I have never seen people with their hands out for tips like they do in the States. It's unreal. I believe some don't even get a retainer. They live on tips.
Yeah.
You know, I've been there too often to see it. But one thing I can tell you, which I think is disappointing, I've been in so many places, restaurants and other places, and the waiter or waitress is all over you like a rash. And you think they're your best friends.
Yeah.
You meet them out in the street, they don't want to know you.
Once they get their tip.
Mate, I don't get it, because here in Australia, you meet somebody out in the street, it's Australia.
Yeah.
You'll talk to anybody unless you're some sort of a jerk. But most people aren't. Most people are friendly, they're open. We're getting a lot more Americanized now as time goes on, as the cities get bigger and bigger. But it still doesn't stop the friendliness. It still doesn't stop the camaraderie that you have with people. And just like you and I, Bill, we met 27 years ago on a project. We got to know each other, and we still know each other. Yep. And I happily will give you my thoughts on a lot of things, and you give me yours.
Yep. And we'll share it over a beer shortly.
After we finish tonight, yeah, I'll open one.
Good.
All right, my friend. Look, I appreciate all the time you spent with me. If you want to summarize today's conversation, how would you do that?
I find you inspiring.
Thank you.
I appreciate your experience in the industry and your willingness to share it with people. You touched on other salespeople not sharing their knowledge earlier on.
Yes.
You are more willing to do that to see other people succeed. You don't like seeing people fail. So that's a trait that I admire.
Thank you.
I wish you more and more success.
Thank you. You know, I just would like to finish with something before I do my summary. And basically, I've met so many people in sales, especially at the top end, that have stopped sharing their knowledge. And they do that on purpose because so many people have come up to them wanting certain information. They then pass it on. Now, that person doesn't use that information, but tells other people that he got this information and shares it with them, and it doesn't go past what he's just shared. This is why a lot of people at the top end in sales don't want to share it, because the more they do, the more it's not appreciated. And that's what I appreciate about you. Look, you're open in so many different ways. You've got another virtue that I really admire in people, and that's you listen. And you listen intently when you are listening. And if we go back over this video, you're going to see that same trait in you.
Okay.
And that's a trait that every salesperson should have, because the more you listen, the more you can sell.
Absolutely right. What is it? 2 ears and 1 mouth?
Correct. Now, I just want to talk about listening for a minute. And I can go on all night with all these different things that just keep coming to mind as we're talking. But I used to buy a lot of reports, especially from Yale and Harvard University, until about 20 years ago, because that's the only way you got detailed information. These days, you've got the internet, different story. I'm not sure what sort of information you've got. It's not detailed, but it's information. And with what I used to buy, I remember, I can't remember which of the universities it was from, but it talked about the questioning process. And what it said was salespeople in general are taught to keep asking questions. What people don't understand is the recipient or the prospect has a limit as to how many questions they're prepared to listen to. And that limit comes in somewhere between 11 and 14. So if you're out there selling and you've now asked more than 10 questions of somebody, you're in the danger zone. And the more questions you ask, the more likely they are to terminate whatever you're working on.
They start feeling interrogated and start shutting down.
Well, how would you feel if somebody comes up with 20 questions?
That's right.
I wouldn't like it. And I'd wonder where this person's coming from. You know, another thing that I've had in the past that I've learned a lot from is when people are asking questions, they get very personal. And when people pass that line between business and being personal, guess what you're going to do? You're going to shut down because it's none of their business.
Yeah.
And yet, if you're in sales, you don't understand that.
But if you have a conversation with somebody and they volunteer that information, it's not questioning.
Well, now let's talk about the conversation, because I'd love to finish this, but that's a good point to finish on. The conversation you have with somebody is based on how many questions you ask. Now, you've got two people, one asking questions, the other person talking. If you go to the person that was doing the talking and ask them what they thought of the conversation, they say, gee, he was a good listener.
Yeah.
right? A good conversationalist, they'll go down that track because you allow them to talk. And the most important thing that people like to do is to share their experiences if you're genuinely interested.
Correct.
Not if you're just asking questions, but if there's an interest there, you can keep asking.
Which becomes a conversation, not an interrogation.
Correct. Yeah. Bill, I really appreciate the time you've spent. I've admired you for many years, you know that. We've had many a conversation on many a subject, and I can't even start to think how many phone calls we've probably had over the years as well on top of that. But I've seen the work that you've done. I've seen the products that you've built. Like I said, some of those have started me, like the concrete houses you've been building and whatever.
Yeah.
And the insulation properties that they have are second to none. I would like to see one finished. I've only seen them in construction. I think I've seen 2 or 3. But with everything that you've done, the work that you do is brilliant. And I think you've summed it up also brilliantly by saying 2 of your customers are architects.
Yeah.
And they built monster houses. Now, an architect will probably know more about the building industry than any builder would ever know. And yet you've not only got them on side, but they've become your customers.
That's right.
And for that, I congratulate you. And I congratulate you for taking the time out. We run a bit over time, but I think what we can pass on with this video is more than worthwhile to most people in sales.
I hope it is.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Peter.
God bless. Bye now.
I can have a drink now?
Yeah. Be your guest. Here we are. There's a sign that says stop recording. I want to thank my friend Bill Klohn, who I've always known as Billy, but this is a formal occasion, so we're going to call him Bill. And Bill, the interview was great, mate. You kept asking questions that really pushed my limits, and I'm glad you did, because the audience got a lot from it, and there's a lot that you can glean from the answers that I've given, but there's a lot that I picked up from the answers that I heard Bill say as well. So there's a two-way street here. But one of the things that didn't come across as well as it should have is Bill's sense of humour. Now, he's always been one of these larrikin type people when you're in private conversation with him. So have a look at this. I've just extracted this snippet from the time that we spent talking together, and I think you'll get a better understanding of his sense of humour. Lots of times it can be dry, but it's still good sense of humour. And the people that have told me that, especially in seminars over the years, I ask, what is your conversion rate? Hang on. When you get an itchy nose, you've got to do something about it.
You're going to edit that bit out, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you can edit this bit out too. Okay, I'm good now. So we don't live too far away from each other, and Billy's offered to cook dinner, and I've offered to take it up, but I'm bringing the wine to the dinner. And what I've selected now, I'm a collector of old wine, and I've been doing this for as long as I remember, and I have quite a few bottles which are more than 20 years old. And what I'm going to share is this particular bottle with Billy. Now, it's a bottle by a man or a winemaker called Jim Barry out of Adelaide, out of the Adelaide Hills. And Jim Barry not only created this wine, but he created this wine back in 2003 as a tribute to Australia's greatest ever cricketer, Sir Donald Bradman. And we're going to sample this. That was the very first edition that was produced. There it is again. And that's the same bottle that he and I are going to sample. But in between that,
I want to sample a tribute to my friend Billy as well. And I've got here my favourite type of grape, a Shiraz. There it is. And I'm sure that that too is going to be superb. It's not a 20-year-old one like the Jim Barry 2003 Sir Donald Bradman Cover Drive edition, but I tell you what, it still tastes pretty good. So cheers. Cheers to you, Billy, and cheers to Bill's audience. Love it, mate, and I'm looking forward to the Jim Barry Cover Drive edition 2003 next Wednesday night. See you then.